Hi, Lynn. Hi, Deanne.
Hey, Lynn.
Thank you for agreeing to talk us through the results of your report today. First of all, it'd be great if you could give us kind of an idea of what the goal of your report was and how you conducted it.
Sure. So the goal of the report was really to review the Lingo Kids activities and experiences, including podcasts, and help to determine the appropriateness of the activities and experiences and the appropriateness of the content, really, in the learning and the development of children with autism. And as we went through each of the activities and experiences, we assigned a rating to each of them, which was either green, yellow, or red. And those colors were really dependent on the appropriateness in terms of the learning for children with autism.
And in terms of thinking about learning, we set up criteria that specified growth in three key areas. This is what guided us with our rankings and our evaluations. And the three key areas are social communication, social interaction, and executive functioning skills.
And those three areas are the three key components that we looked at in this discussion of this concept of theory of mind. And theory of mind is very much a debated concept within the field. But for the purposes of this report and this review, how we really want to think of theory of mind is social thinking, social perspective taking. So there's social communication. And really often when we hear the word communication, what we think of or what first comes to mind is spoken language, the words that come out of our mouth. But there's an equally important piece to social communication. It's not just verbal communication, but also nonverbal communication, which is really communicating and listening with our whole body. Well, what does that mean? It means considering components of eye contact, gestures, which I'm always doing a lot of, facial expressions, and body language. The second facet of that is social interaction, which is so closely tied to social communication. But when we talk about social interaction, we are really looking at that interactive component, that reciprocal to and fro. And we can consider that in the context of a conversation and conversational turn taking. We can think of it in the context of joint attention or sharing attention on a preferred activity or toy. And we can think of it in terms of engaging in imaginative play with a peer.
And then the third area of our framework is executive functioning. So what is that? Well, from an early age, we are building and using thought processes, cognitive abilities that are referred to as executive functioning skills. These allow us, we use them all day long. It allows us to pay attention. Johnny, it's time to set the table. Let's get this done. It allows us to control our impulses and delay gratification. Okay, can't have cookies until after dinner. It allows us to persist at a task, even things we don't like to do so much. Come on, Jill, it's time to get your homework done. It allows us to adapt in the face of changing situations. It helps us to transition turn our focus from one activity to the next. And it allows us to manage our emotions. So in sum, we're using executive functioning skills all day long, and they're really what we use to self-monitor and self-regulate. And here's the key tie-in with theory of mind is it's our ability to take a bird's eye view of our own emotions, our own beliefs, our own thought processes. So, you can't take the perspective and begin to take the perspective of someone else unless you're grounded in understanding your own perspective. Now, children with autism will often struggle with or developmentally lag in several key areas of executive functioning. One would be cognitive flexibility. That, again, ability to go with the flow, or when there's a setback, being able to adapt. Children with autism are often very rigid in their thought patterns and in their routines, and they don't like any deviations. Planning is another area that children with autism will often struggle with. Planning is that ability to dissect and break down into little steps a goal that we're trying to reach. And children with autism sometimes really struggle to break that down.
So in this study, you reviewed 68 LingoKid games on the app and labeled them green, yellow, or red, as you said earlier, and relating to their function in supporting kids with autism. Can you tell us firstly a little bit about the green activities that you reviewed and what features about those games or videos specifically help assist kids with autism?
Sure. Just briefly, let's talk about what constituted a green rating. So a green rating was really assigned to the activities or the experiences that were deemed to have the very best learning opportunities for children with autism. So one was called Feelings Audiobook. So this was an audiobook that helped with the identification and the learning around 6 basic emotions. And the emotions were sad, surprised, angry, sleepy, happy, and scared. And as the story was being read in this audio format, it also had the words of the story running across the bottom of the screen, highlighting the words to match the audio portion of the audiobook. And then what was also a very nice feature of this audiobook was that it included both verbal and nonverbal displays of the emotions that were being taught. Another component that captured our attention was something that we noted throughout many LingoKid activities, and that was at the close of the audiobook, it puts forth a question for the child to consider. And in this case, the question was, how do you feel today? And the audiobook displays all the emotions that were being taught during the course of that audiobook. And so it really gives the child an opportunity to generalize what they've learned, to apply what they've learned to themselves, and even perhaps to get a parent or sibling involved in the discussion of how do I feel? So that was the Feelings audiobook. The second activity I wanted to touch on was a podcast, and it was one of my favorite podcasts that we reviewed, and that was Love is in the Air. And that podcast really explains the concept of love. It also has some educational components and talking about St. Valentine and talking about where the symbol of the heart comes from and how that's related to love. It again integrates the verbal and the nonverbal. So in the discussion of this concept of love, we hear about and the podcast talks about the nonverbals that accompany this sentiment. So things like the sound of a kiss. The other component that was very much captured in this podcast was this executive functioning piece of cognitive flexibility. And the way that the podcast approaches cognitive flexibility is to really begin a discussion and to get children to begin to think about the ways that people experience love. We don't all have the same experience of love. A perspective and an experience outside of our own exists.
Let me go on and discuss just a couple more of the many Green Rate activities that we came across. So there's this Lingo Chef video series, which is terrific because throughout the series, it's always modeling some sort of social communication or social interaction. So in this case, it's the mashed potatoes Lingo Chef video. And it shows an interaction between a father and his son as they engage in the activity of making mashed potatoes. We really enjoyed the fact that it demonstrates appropriate turn taking between the child and dad. And in some cases, the child is taking the lead. And then as they proceed through the different steps of doing the mashed potatoes making, there's lots of nonverbal communication going on. They're expressing feelings with their whole body.
So those were the green activities. Now if we can have a look at some of the yellow activities. So if you can tell us what these games are doing well in terms of the autism lens, and perhaps what enhancements you would suggest to add for improvement.
So these activities had potential, just like the green activities. They were hitting the criteria we were looking for in terms of dimensions of social communication or collaboration or executive functioning. It's just that we felt in some cases they needed some enhancements to optimize it, to really tie better to those framework elements that we were looking for. So let's take one example, the bedroom cleanup activity. There's this bird character that walks into the bedroom, and in the background you're hearing this really fun, catchy tune, clean up, clean up. And the bird's looking, and in sync with the lyrics of the song, the bird sees the room is dirty, there's clothes on the floor, things on the pillows off the bed. So the character, in concert with the song, goes through the steps of cleaning up the bedroom. Now, an enhancement, this was a yellow activity, would be very simple. Add a social interaction element. Bring in another character, like a parent, so that the parent could perhaps share joint attention with the child about what are the aspects of the room that constitute dirty. And as the child completes each task, the parent could be showing a nonverbal gesture like thumbs up or clapping or nodding that this was a job well done. So just the introduction of another character, like a parent, would make it social and even optimize this learning activity around a daily routine, which, by the way, we know from a survey that Lingo Kids did with parents of autism, children of autism, daily routines is a really key challenge area. So more activities like this that depict daily routines is a great idea.
And I'll briefly talk about a game called Robot Game Maker. This is a fun one. I see it as really tapping into a child's creative genius. They get to create their own robot. And they do that by really selecting a head, arms, and legs to create this robot. And then there's a little celebration with confetti, and the robot dances, and there's a little music. What's nice about this activity is the way in which it teaches cognitive flexibility in the context of a fun game. I mentioned that, so often when children with autism are playing, for example, you will see that they use materials in a very functional way. However, in this game, when a child is selecting a head, it's not just traditionally looking heads that they then stick on a robot. They get to choose from a myriad of items that can be used in a way that they're not intended. So a tea kettle, for example, that we think we use it to pour tea. Well, now all of a sudden, we're starting to learn the idea that a tea kettle can be used for a head. So it begins to teach this cognitive flexibility as well as imaginative play. And overall, the activity also has a really nice, appropriate level of stimulation. It's stimulating enough not to be dry or boring, but it's not overstimulating where it's going to be too much for the sensory system of a child with autism and then just have them shut down and turn away from the activity. A couple of enhancements to consider here One would be very similar to what Lynn had mentioned with the previous activity, and that is to add an interactive component. So now instead of one robot, you could consider adding another robot. And there's some interaction that's happening between the two robots. Maybe they're sharing some facial expressions and giving high fives or communicating in some way. Another element that would be very easy to add would be allowing the child to not only build the head, the arms, and the legs, but what about if the child gets to build the facial features that then portray a certain emotion? The third element that we just want to be careful of in general across any activities is the clarity of instruction. We, of course, don't want kids to become frustrated because they don't know how to navigate a game and then just not want to do the game. Specifically in this robot making game, it instructed us to add an arm, but some additional instruction may be helpful here. But the Robot Game Maker was a really fun way to become creative and start thinking about using things in a manner they're not intended.
Wow, fantastic. Well, that's all the questions we have today. Thank you so much for sharing all the information you have with us, all your findings, all your insights. It's going to be really useful and really helpful.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to download the Lingo Kids app so that you can explore our in-app parents community and be part of all the great families around the world who are raising amazing kids. For ideas on activities to do with your child, or for general parenting advice and conversations, subscribe to this channel. See you next time.